Okay, let's get into this. We have a huge stack of research to go through today.
We do?
We're talking 500,000 records, 3 continents, all focused on, well, one big urban problem.
Yeah.
How to make public transit better.
Or at least feel less awful.
Exactly. So if you're in city planning or infrastructure, or you just hate your commute, this is for you. Our mission today is to act as a sort of research brief.
Right.
First, we're going to figure out how researchers even measure things like, satisfaction and perceived time.
Which is incredibly complex.
And second, we'll pull out the practical evidence-based conclusions that transit authorities could, in theory, use right now.
That's right. And what's so fascinating here is that we're moving past the simple stuff, like whether the trains ran on time.
Right.
These studies, and they're from massive data sets in Sweden, the Beijing Metro, and Washington, D.C., they're trying to quantify the subjective experience.
The misery.
Exactly. We're looking at why certain behaviors, like some commuter choices that seem totally irrational, are actually perfectly logical when you measure them against their real experience.
I love that, quantifying misery. So let's start with the methodology. How on earth do you scientifically capture something as, fluid and subjective as traveler satisfaction?
Well, it starts with a basic definition. Satisfaction is just the gap between what you expected from the service and what you actually got.
Okay.
The research, particularly the Abenoza study, uses a kind of layered approach. It blends what people say with what the data actually shows.
So layer 1 is the obvious one, I assume, the survey.
Exactly, the explicit approach. You ask passengers to rate their overall satisfaction, and then you ask them to rate the importance of specific things.
What kind of things?
They call them quality of service attributes, or QoSA. So, cleanliness, network coverage, staff friendliness, that sort of thing.
But what people say they care about can be unreliable, right? We might say safety is number 1, but if the bus only comes once an hour, we're not taking it.
And that is why the implicit approach is so powerful. Researchers move past that self-reporting and use pretty advanced statistical modeling.
Like what?
Think of highly sophisticated correlation analysis, regression, even neural networks to infer importance.
So they see which attributes, statistically, actually predict a high overall satisfaction score.
Precisely. It reveals the hidden drivers of satisfaction regardless of what the passenger might have said on a survey.
So if everyone says cleanliness is most important, but the model shows time between trains is what actually predicts a 5-star rating, you know where to spend your money.
That's it. It shifts the focus from perceived priorities to real behavioral drivers.
Okay, now let's talk about time perception. It's even trickier. A minute waiting for a bus feels like 10 minutes once you're on it. How do these modern studies put a price on those painful minutes?
Well, they've largely moved away from traditional surveys, what we'd call stated preference, or SP data.
Where you ask people what they would do.
Right. Instead, they now rely on revealed preference RP data. They don't ask you what route you would take. They look at the data from your smart card, from train timetables, and they see the route you actually took.
That's fascinating. So they're reverse engineering my mental state just by tracking my commute.
That's a perfect way to put it. The core tool for this is something called a discrete choice model.
Okay.
Specifically a nested logit model in a lot of cases. It essentially acts like a mind reader. It looks at all the possible routes you could have taken.
I'm based on the one I chose.
It calculates your internal utility function.
A utility function. Okay, let's break that down a bit.
Just think of it like a mental scorecard in your head. Every good thing about a route, like getting a seat, scores points. Every bad thing, waiting, crowding, deducts points.
And you just choose the route with the highest score. Or I guess the lowest misery score.
The lowest disutility, yes.
So what's on that scorecard besides just travel time?
The basics are there. Walking time, initial wait time, time on the train. But for these really congested systems, they had to add variables for high-stress situations.
Such as?
Time spent traveling backwards on purpose, and the waiting time at those specific turnback stations.
We will definitely come back to the backwards travel. But first, the most critical detail here, I think, is how these models handle crowding. It's not just a minor inconvenience, is it? It hits a kind of tipping point.
That's the crucial insight. Crowding isn't linearly bad. The researchers found it only starts to register as a real penalty on your mental scorecard after it crosses a certain physical threshold.
Give us an example. What does that threshold look like?
In the Beijing Metro study, the model worked best when the platform density threshold was set at 3 passengers per square meter. Below that, you barely notice it. The crowding penalty is almost 0. But the second you cross that line, the stress coefficient just kicks in hard.
And what about on the train itself?
The critical load factor was 80% capacity. Below 80%, people are generally fine. Above it, the model starts penalizing that travel choice heavily.
That is unbelievably useful. It turns an abstract idea like discomfort into a hard, measurable planning limit. You know exactly when you need to act.
Precisely. It grounds the abstract in physical reality.
Okay, so now we know how to measure subjective misery. What do the models tell us about who is miserable and why? Let's look at the Swedish data, which was just massive. 14 years, almost 500,000 records.
Right. This Abenoza study is so important because it really confirmed that the one-size-fits-all approach to public transit is just, well, it's doomed to fail. They identified 5 completely distinct traveler segments.
Okay, who are they?
You have inactive travelers, long-distance commuters, students, and then crucially, 2 groups of people who often choose their cars: urban motorist commuters and rural motorist commuters.
I see. And did they find any universal truths, things that matter to everyone?
They did. Across all segments, authorities need to prioritize the basics: customer interface, the network itself, and of course, trip time. But the differences between the segments are where the real policy insights are.
So which group stood out?
The rural motorist commuters. This group was markedly dissatisfied with service operation attributes.
What does that mean exactly?
An urban commuter might complain about a 5-minute delay or crowding, but a rural commuter is dealing with maybe 1 bus an hour, no service after 7 p.m., really poor connections.
So for them, if that one bus fails, their whole day is ruined. The urban commuter can just, grab the next subway.
Exactly. Their disutility, that mental penalty, it just skyrockets with any lapse in service operation. A canceled bus, a major delay. The finding tells authorities to stop just adding capacity downtown and start thinking about reliability and frequency on those low-density routes.
That's a major policy takeaway. Okay, let's go back to those extreme conditions, to the most surprising behavior you mentioned, the traveling backwards phenomenon from the Beijing study.
It is a remarkable illustration of just how high the cost of disutility can be.
So set the scene for us.
During the morning peak, at these incredibly congested stations, passengers will intentionally get on a train going in the opposite direction.
Away from their destination.
Away from their destination. They ride 1 or 2 stops upstream to a less crowded turnback station, get off, cross the platform, and then get on a now less crowded forward train.
Why on earth would they do that? It adds so much time.
To avoid being denied boarding. And this is crucial to get a seat. The congestion at their home station is so bad that the expected wait for a forward train they can actually fit on is perceived as longer and more miserable than the time it takes to do this whole maneuver.
And the model validation shows this is a huge deal.
It does. When they first ran the models without accounting for this, they got physically impossible crowding levels, like train load factors of 165%.
Which can't happen.
Right. Once they modeled the backwards travel choice, the numbers dropped to a more realistic, though still very crowded, 120%. It proved they were capturing a real, widespread behavior.
Okay, let's get to the numbers that quantify this misery. How much worse does that extra time feel?
The researchers put a specific coefficient on it. The time you spend on the train physically traveling backwards is perceived as 23.5% more negative than normal travel time.
Wow.
But that's not the real killer. The real emotional cost is the waiting time.
The time spent on that turnback platform, waiting for the train to come back the other way.
Exactly. Passengers show a massive, statistically significant aversion to waiting there. 1 minute of waiting time at that turnback station is perceived as 1.97 times the disutility of a minute of initial waiting at your home station.
Wait, 1.97, so almost double the penalty. That minute feels twice as bad as the first minute they waited. Why is that specific wait so awful?
Because it's a moment of heightened vulnerability. You've committed to this strategy, you've spent time going the wrong way, and now you're just standing there, hoping it pays off. The stress is concentrated in that moment.
So, if the aversion is that high, nearly 2x multiplier, why do they do it at all? Why tolerate that?
Because of the rational trade-off. Even with that huge penalty, the expected perceived waiting time at the turnback station is still less than the expected prolonged and uncertain wait back at their home station, where they might get denied boarding 3 or 4 times.
It's an insurance policy against total commute meltdown. It makes perfect sense, actually.
It's a calculated move to minimize total misery.
Okay, let's pivot from competition inside the network to competition from outside. Public transit versus ride-hailing, based on that DC study.
Right. This analysis used over 500,000 real-world choices between the WMATA transit system and Uber. It helps us understand what public transit is really up against.
Let's start with in-vehicle time. How do they stack up?
The analysis found that ride-hailing in vehicle time is perceived as 35% less negative than public transit in vehicle time.
35% less negative. So, said another way, the public transit time feels over 50% more negative than the Uber time.
It does?
That's a huge gap. Why? I'm guessing crowding, getting a seat?
That's a huge part of it, yes. But it's also about the opportunity to do other things.
Hmm.
In a ride-hail, you have space, you can work, you can read. On a crowded bus, that time is often just lost time, so it gets penalized more heavily on the mental scorecard.
And what about waiting time? We know it's already highly penalized for transit.
The standard established ratio for public transit is that 1 minute of waiting feels like 1.62 minutes of writing. For ride-hailing, that ratio drops to 1.32.
So the wait for an Uber feels about 20% less bad than the wait for a bus. What makes the wait better?
Two main things. First, real-time tracking. That reduces uncertainty. Knowing your car is 2 minutes away is much less stressful than waiting for a bus that might be late.
Okay, that makes sense.
And second, the responsibility for boarding is shared. The driver is also looking for you. For a bus, you have to be constantly alert, scanning for the right number. It requires more mental energy.
Right, less stress, lower disutility.
Yeah.
And finally, for the policymakers, what do they find for the value of travel time, the VOTT?
For this specific segment of ride-hailing users in D.C., the average VOTT was estimated at $27.60 per hour. That's what people are willing to pay to avoid the walking, waiting, and discomfort of public transit.
Excellent. So we've quantified the experience, we've benchmarked it against competitors. Let's finish with the concrete policy implications, starting with managing passenger flow.
This is a critical point, especially for getting budgets approved. When operators use strategies to reduce passenger flow, like metering people onto a crowded platform,
Right.
the objective, observed time saved, consistently underestimates the perceived time saved by passengers.
So if I just use a stopwatch to measure the benefit, I'm missing the real story.
You are. And the underestimation gets bigger the more aggressive the control is. In one case study, at a high control ratio, the objective measurement was off by almost 60%.
60%. So the social benefit, the reduction in stress, is far greater than the metric the transit authority is probably using to justify the cost.
Exactly. They have to use models that incorporate perceived time to accurately measure the huge social benefits of reducing congestion. Otherwise, they will always undervalue their own best policies.
Which suggests they should be much more aggressive with these flow control policies.
Yeah.
Okay, last point. Back to traveling backwards. Should operators encourage this or stop it?
They need to find the optimal point. The research is clear. Encouraging backwards travel is only a good idea in very high flow, very congested scenarios. In less crowded situations, it can actually increase the overall perceived waiting time.
That's completely counterintuitive. Why would it make things worse?
Because of that massive 1.97 aversion multiplier for waiting at the turnback station. If the origin station isn't congested enough to justify that stressful wait, the strategy backfires. The cure is worse than the disease.
So operators have to be almost surgically precise.
They do. In the Shahi Station case study, which was incredibly congested, they found that guiding about 20% of passengers to travel backwards gave the maximum benefit. It reduced average perceived waiting time for the whole system. The key is finding that sweet spot where you relieve the origin station without creating a new bottleneck upstream.
Okay, so to wrap this all up then.
To summarize this deep dive, I'd say effective public transport enhancement isn't just about optimizing physical travel time. It's fundamentally about dynamically modeling and managing perceived time and disutility.
Right.
We have to stop thinking of passengers as just dots on a map and start seeing them as rational actors making complex choices to minimize their own misery, even if that means, going in the wrong direction for a while.
And to build on that for my final thought, the sheer prevalence and rationality of that traveling backwards strategy points directly to a crucial need. We have to integrate this behavioral understanding into infrastructure design itself.
What do you mean?
I mean, if people are willing to pay such a massive time and stress penalty just to get a seat, then we need to mitigate the root cause. This means planners should be paying serious attention to the feasibility of dedicated train turnarounds, of having station yards at these key congestion points.
So you provide an efficient way to move empty trains upstream.
Exactly. You provide the capacity where it's needed, you eliminate the cause of the problem, and you reduce the need for passengers to adopt these high-stress, high-disutility coping strategies. That's how you improve long-term network efficiency and, most importantly, passenger welfare.